Hi, welcome to Far From Eden. It's Sunday. It's the day we do literary archaeology. When we delve into old poetry, old literature, all those things where they seem to know right from wrong. They seem to know how to order society. And it seems to me that the elites, the overlords, whatever you want to call the people who pull the puppet strings, they don't want you to know this stuff. And they don't want you to know that we used to know it. They want you to think that progress is always good, regardless of what we're progressing towards. They want you to think that, oh, we just were stupid in the olden days. We were backwards. Now it's so much better. With each generation, they encourage the young people to think that they know better than the generation before, which is the opposite of what people in Christendom had done for centuries, where we knew to learn from our elders, to learn from those who went before us, that they had wisdom. And those elders knew to pass those things on, to keep things running correctly, because they knew if they don't, things will get topsy-turvy. Well, I think they're topsy-turvy now. And it gives me great comfort to look back and see what we used to know and know that my gut and deep down, when I'm looking at the world and saying, this isn't right, this is, no. Even though all the powers that be are like, no, you're wrong, you're hateful, all the rest of it. Turns out when we look back, no, that's not the case. So we are doing the Grimm Brothers fairy tales. This is my granddaddy book that has, I don't even know how many fairy tales are in here, enough to keep getting little nuggets of wisdom and to just, I feel like it fortifies me. When I say at the end of each show, I always say, feed your soul. This feels like it feeds my soul. So, I mean, the truth shall set you free after all. And I think that seeking truth is very beneficial and draws us closer to our Creator. Speaking of our Creator, I think the next fairy tale in this book, the title is very interesting. And I am not shocked at all that it's nowhere to be found in my 20th century version of the Grimm Brothers, because they, not the Grimm Brothers, the publishers and the powers that be, continued to edit, change, I would say basically, to use our modern day knowledge, wokeify the tales, little bits at a time along the way. And sometimes I think there were just some tales that they're like, oh, we can't even fix this one. We just have to pretend it never existed and hope that people don't look far enough back. Well, we are. So take that, overlords. So this next one is called The Virgin Mary's Child. That's right. I guess we're going to get a little Catholic here. I'm all right. I'm all right with it. I'm not a Catholic myself, but I'll have to say that there are a lot of Catholics out there who know a lot more about history than the Protestants do. They know the history, and it's interesting to me. So I'm taking note of that. Anyway, that's a side note. The Virgin Mary's Child. A poor woodcutter and his wife lived at the edge of a large forest with their only child, a 3-year-old little girl. They were so poor that they couldn't afford daily meals anymore and didn't know how they would provide food for their daughter. One morning, the woodcutter, who was distressed by all this, went into the forest to work. As he began chopping wood, a tall, beautiful woman suddenly appeared before him. She was wearing a crown of shining stars on her head, and she said to him, "I am the Virgin Mary, mother of the Christ child. Since you are poor and needy, bring me your child. I'll take her with me and be her mother and look after her." The woodcutter obeyed her. He fetched his child and gave her to the Virgin Mary, who took her up to heaven. Once there, everything went well for the girl. She ate only cake and drank sweet milk. Her clothes were made of gold, and the little angels played with her. One day, about the time the girl had turned 14, the Virgin Mary had to go on a long journey. Before she went away, she summoned the girl and said, "Dear child, I am trusting you with the keys to the 13 doors of the kingdom of heaven. You may open 12 of the doors and look at all the marvelous things inside, but I forbid you to open the 13th door, for this little key, that this little key unlocks." Oh goodness. And there's the number 13. There's a reason that number is what it is. And I know that some of you in the chat will know that that's the evil ones that exist in this world, who are doing the evil ones, the ultimate evil one's duties, or not duties, carrying out his agenda. They know numbers. So it's not shocking that the 13th pops up, and that's the one she's not supposed to open. Okay. The maiden promised to obey her commands, and after the Virgin Mary had departed, she opened a new room every day and looked into the room of the heavenly realm. In each one of them, there was an apostle in dazzling light. Never in her life had she seen such splendor and glory. When she had finished opening the 12 doors, the forbidden door was the only one left. For a long time, she resisted her curiosity, but finally she was overcome by it and opened the 13th door as well. And as the door sprang open, she saw the Holy Trinity sitting in fire and splendor. Then she touched the flames a little bit with her finger, and the finger turned golden. Quickly, she slammed the door shut and ran away. Her heart started pounding and wouldn't stop. It's our nature. It's the nature. Yep. A few days later, the Virgin Mary returned from her journey and asked the maiden to return the keys of heaven to her. When the girl handed her the bunch of keys, the Virgin looked into her eyes and said, "Didn't you also open the 13th door?" "No," she answered. Then the Virgin Mary put her hand on the maiden's heart and could feel it pounding and pounding. Now she knew the girl had disobeyed her command and had opened the door. Once again, she asked, "Are you sure you didn't open the door?" "I'm sure." The maiden denied doing it for a second time. When the Virgin Mary glanced at the finger that had become golden from touching the heavenly fire, she knew the maiden was guilty and said, "You've disobeyed me and lied. You're no longer worthy to stay in heaven." All at once, the girl sank into a deep sleep. And when she awoke, she was lying on the earth beneath a tall tree, surrounded by thick bushes, so that she was completely encircled. Her mouth was also locked so that she couldn't utter one word. Since the tree was hollow, she could sit inside during the rain and storms, and it was also where she slept. Roots and wild berries were her only food, and she went out looking for them as far as she could walk. In the autumn, she gathered roots and leaves and carried them into the hollow tree. When snow and ice came, she sat inside the tree. Before long, her clothes became tattered, and one piece after the other fell off her body. She sat there completely covered by leaves. As soon as the sun began to shine again, she went out and sat in front of the tree. Her long hair covered her on all sides like a cloak. One day, during springtime, she was sitting in front of the tree when someone forced his way through the bushes. It was the king, who had been hunting in the forest and had lost his way, and he was amazed to find such a beautiful maiden sitting alone in this desolate spot. I bet she's glad it wasn't a bear. Sorry. I couldn't help myself. Oh, that has ruined us all, that bear thing. So he asked her whether she would like to come with him to his castle. However, she couldn't answer. Instead, she merely nodded a little with her head. Then the king lifted her up onto his horse and brought her to the castle. Soon he became so fond of her that he made her his wife. You probably liked the fact that she was rather quiet. That's just my little note. After a year had passed, the queen gave birth to a beautiful son. During the night, however, the Virgin Mary appeared before her and said, "If you'll tell me the truth and say that you unlocked the forbidden door, I'll give you back the power of speech, without which you really can't enjoy life. If you are stubborn and won't confess, I shall take your baby away with me." So she's just asking her to be accountable, it sounds like. It's not over yet. I know I have to say that because the Grimm brothers just tend to be like, the end, like all of a sudden. But she's asking her to be accountable. She's giving her a chance to be accountable. That's all she has to do. It's all she has to do is get over herself, get over her pride, have some humility, and be accountable. Virgin Mary already knows the truth. And anyway, let's see what she chooses to do. Okay. But the queen remained stubborn and denied that she had opened the forbidden door. So the Virgin Mary took the little child and disappeared with him. Goodness gracious. The next morning, when the baby was no longer there, a rumor began circulating among the people that the queen was an ogress and had eaten her own child. Well, they had to explain like where it went. What's she gonna say? Well, you see, the Virgin Mary came down, and this whole story, like, I mean, that she's an ogress, I guess that, that pans out. Then another year passed, and the queen gave birth to another son. Once more, the Virgin Mary appeared before her and asked her to tell the truth. Otherwise, she would also lose the second child. But the queen persisted in denying that she had opened the forbidden door. So the Virgin Mary took the child away with her. The next morning, when this baby was also missing, the king's counselors said openly that the queen was an ogress, and they demanded that she be executed for her godless deeds. Well, I mean, yeah. It's amazing she got away with it the first time. However, the king ordered them to keep quiet and refused to believe them because he loved his wife so much. Well, what do we call that man? Dude, your two babies have disappeared, and you just love her so much, you're just gonna like let that go? Simp. Simps have existed forever. They really have. I think they have. Reading reading some of these fairy tales, we've definitely identified some simpage going on. I mean, there's nothing new under the sun. There's nothing new under the sun. It's just that back then, they called it out and they taught next generations to do better. In the 3rd year, the queen gave birth to a princess, and the Virgin Mary appeared before her once more and took her to heaven. Wait a minute. That was quick. She didn't even ask her she just took her. And the Virgin Mary appeared before her once more and took her to heaven, where she showed her, she took I see, the queen. Virgin Mary appeared before her once more and took her to heaven, where she showed her how her 2 oldest children were playing with the globe of the earth. Thereupon, the Virgin Mary asked the queen once more to confess her mistake and stop lying. However, the queen wouldn't budge and continued to stand by her story. So the Virgin Mary left her and took away her 3rd child too. So what they're saying is this woman refuses to be accountable, refuses to humble herself and be accountable, and doesn't care if her children are okay, they're in heaven, but she's sacrificing her children. She's hurting the husband. He would like to have his children. This lady doesn't care. All she has to do is say, yeah, I did it. Like, she's not even going to be punished. She'll be rewarded for telling the truth. They cannot get over themselves. Wow. You guys, this has been going on forever. Now the king could no longer restrain his counselors, who continued to claim that the queen was an ogress. They were certain, and since she couldn't speak, she still can't talk. She couldn't defend herself. Consequently, she was condemned to die at the stake. You mean like a witch? As she stood tied to the stake and the fire began to burn all around her, her heart was moved, and she thought to herself, before I die, I'd like to confess to the Virgin Mary that I opened the forbidden door in heaven. I've been so wicked by denying it all this time. Sure, when the consequences come around, right? All of a sudden we can be accountable because consequences. And just as she was thinking all this to herself, heaven opened up right then and there, and the Virgin Mary descended with the 2 little sons at either side and the daughter in her arms. The fire was extinguished by itself, and the Virgin Mary stepped forward to the queen and said, "Since you want to speak the truth, your guilt is forgiven." Then she handed the queen her children, opened her mouth so that she could speak from then on, and bestowed happiness on her for the rest of her life. And that one ends right there. And how fantastic was that? That we have a woman who could not resist temptation. Could not resist temptation. There was one thing she was forbidden to do. What does that remind me of? A little bit like Eve in the garden. Just couldn't resist. There's one tree. You don't eat of the forbidden tree, of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Just not that tree, okay? She meets a serpent. She's like, this is some snake I've never met before. I'm going to have a whole conversation with him and trust him over the loving God who created me. And I'm going to break the one rule. And then I'm going to trick my husband into eating it too. And this chick was no different. She could have been grateful in the very beginning, right? And no, she could not be accountable. She couldn't resist the temptation. And then all she had to do was admit it. And she couldn't admit it. She could not be accountable. And only when the fire was right there, could she finally admit it. maybe if the king had done that sooner, because at the end of the day, wasn't it finally the king made that decision? So basically, there's another layer to this, because the king finally stopped simping and said, okay, no, there needs to be consequences. This is not okay. You cannot do this. Where are my children? Right? So he finally decided to say no. And he finally decided to say, we're putting you in check, to say the least. And that corrected the situation. Right? That, I have to say this carefully because of the platform that we're on. Rumble, it doesn't matter, but YouTube, it matters. She needed the man to say, no, that's it. I'm not taking it, right? And to impose some consequences. Now, in this day and age, the cops get called. You can't do that. And I understand that women would say, what do you mean? Husband can't punish his wife. That's oppression, etc., etc. However, I will say, in this story, look at how it benefited her. Is it bad for the woman? Is what the king did at the end of the day? She ended up happy for the rest of her life because the king took action and basically created the circumstances that held her accountable to where she couldn't wiggle out of it. And they want to take you men, they want to take your power, they want to disenfranchise you, they want to remove you as the head of your household, where the buck stops with you. It's a big responsibility, and they want to remove all that. And that way, your wife runs all over you, your children run all over you, and you are just treated like you're one of the children. And if you dare to stand up for yourself, well, the cops are going to get called. Do you guys remember the interview with Sean Connery and Barbara Walters? Somebody will say it in the comments. So this story, just imagine this story being something you read to your children. You're teaching the boys, look, this is your responsibility. You have a wife. You're not helping her by just letting things slide all the time. That's just not helping her. Sometimes we need to be protected from ourselves and our own foolishness and our own dumb decisions. And yes, you guys will say, well, that just means you're like children. Well, there is a hierarchy. It is God, man, woman, children. We're somewhere in between. And I mean, we are the ones that have the children and take care of them when they're very young. It stands to reason that we would be able to interact with them by our own nature and, play with them at that age and bring them up. It makes sense that that's how our minds would be. It's useful. It's good. It's a good thing when it's put in the right, when it's in its right lane. It's fantastic. It's wonderful. Oh my goodness. What a great one. What a fantastic one. That's so good. But the next one is pretty short. So we'll just have a bonus again, like we did last week. You guys want to do that? I have no idea what it's about, but it's pretty interesting to me because right after the Virgin Mary and her child, we have good bowling and card playing. So it's like, are we going to gambling now? I don't know. I never know what we're digging for when we're doing literary archaeology. We kind of have an idea, but sometimes it's just like, wow, look at this thing we found. Once upon a time, There was an old king who had the most beautiful daughter in the world. One day, he announced, "Whoever can keep watch in my old castle for 3 nights can have the princess for his bride." Now, there was a young man from a poor family who thought to himself, "Why not risk my life? I've got nothing to lose and a lot to win. What's there to think about?" So he appeared before the king and offered to keep watch in the castle for 3 nights. "You may request 3 things to take with you into the castle, but they have to be lifeless objects," the king said. "Well, I'd like to take a carpenter's bench with a knife, a lathe, and fire." All of these things were carried into the castle for him. When it turned dark, he himself went inside. At first, everything was quiet. He built a fire, placed the carpenter's bench with the knife next to it, and sat down at the lathe. Toward midnight, however, a rumbling could be heard, first softly, then more loudly. "Biff, baff, hee hee, holla ho." Okay. It became more dreadful, and then it was somewhat quiet. Finally, a leg came down the chimney and stood right before him. A leg? Okay. "Hey there," the young man cried out. "How about some more? One is too little." What is this story? The noise began once again. Another leg fell down the chimney, and then another and another until there were 9. Legs? Are these bowling pins? What's going on? Okay. "That's enough now. I've got enough for bowling, and there are no balls. Out with them." There was a tremendous uproar, and 2 skulls fell down the chimney. Oh. He put them in the lathe and turned them until they were smooth. "Now they'll roll much better." Then he did the same with the legs and sat them up like bowling pins. There's Thomas. I am really weirded out by this story, you guys. Okay. Hey, now I can have some fun. Suddenly, 2 large black cats appeared and strode around the fire. "Meow, meow," they screeched. "We're freezing, we're freezing." What is going on? What is going on with this story? Creepy. "You fools, what are you screaming about? Sit down by the fire and warm yourselves." After the cats had warmed themselves, they said, "Good fellow, we want to play a round of cards." "All right," he replied, "but show me your paws. You've got such long claws that I've got to give them a good clipping before we begin." Upon saying this, he grabbed them by the scruffs of their necks and lifted them up to the carpenter's bench. Then he fastened them to the vise. Okay. Hold on. Okay. Then he fastened them to the vise and beat them to no mas. In case anybody's just listening, it was beat them to their end. Okay. Afterward, he carried them outside and threw them into a pond that lay across from the castle. Just as he returned to the castle and wanted to settle down and warm himself by the fire, many black cats and dogs came out of every nook and cranny, more and more, so that he couldn't hide himself. They screamed, stomped on the fire, and kicked it about so that the fire went out. So he grabbed his carving knife and yelled, "Get out of here, you riffraff!" And he began swinging the knife. Most of the cats and dogs ran away. The others were ended, and he carried them out and threw them into the pond. Then he went back inside to the fire and blew the sparks so that the fire began again and he could warm himself. After he had warmed himself, he was tired and lay down on a large bed that stood in a corner. Just as he wanted to fall asleep, the bed began to stir and raced around the entire castle. That's fine with me. Just keep it up. Okay. So the bed drove around as those 6 horses were pulling it over stairs and landings. Bing, bang. It turned upside down from top to bottom, and he was beneath it. So he flung the blankets and pillows into the air and jumped off. Anyone who wants a ride can have one. Then he lay down next to the fire until dawn. In the morning, the king arrived, and when he saw the young man lying asleep, he thought he was dead and said, "What a shame." But when the young man heard these words, he awoke, and as soon as he saw the king, he stood up. Then the king asked him how things had gone during the night. "Quite well. One night's gone by smoothly. The other 2 will go by as well." Indeed, the other nights were just like the first, but he already knew what to do, and so on the 4th day, he was rewarded with the king's beautiful daughter. What? That's it. You guys, I don't know. That was the bonus one. What do you guys think about that one? I guess take things as they come, because he certainly every time he was like, all right, let's do it. Okay, the bed's gonna ride around. That's fine. Let's just do it. Okay, all these cats are gonna come. Just gonna handle that too. Just gonna keep, just gonna keep handling things as they come and being brave. I think that this is something that you guys need to really tell me what you think, because this is definitely a story for little boys to, obviously he was rewarded with the king's beautiful daughter. And you had to be brave to deal with all of that. Couldn't run off screaming. He could leave. He left to throw the animals in the pond. He kept going. That's a different one. That was a different one. Wow. I love our Grimm Brothers fairy tales, and I'm so glad that you guys do too. By the way, I forgot, because Lola is asleep. That's my little dog. She reminds me when she distracts me to ask you guys to like the video. Please give it a like. Please help these little fairy tales. I think they're really important. If you guys get some meaning out of it, get some, get your souls fed through this, then maybe other men will too. So thank you guys for being here. Thank you for coming on this journey with me as we dig through the Grimm Brothers fairy tales. The next one for next Sunday is The Wolf and the 7 Kids. And it means goat, like kids goat, because kid used to mean, a goat baby. Now we just call them, we call children kids, which I don't care for. But so wow, my brain is just like absorbing all of it. How wonderful. How wonderful. What a treasure. I'm grateful to the Grimm brothers that they traveled through Europe collecting these stories. And it's an absolute travesty that we did not keep them going, or we didn't notice as the overlords changed them and sort of disappeared them. I don't know how long you'll be able to download them off the internet. I don't know how long you'll be able to buy them, but I have them here, and no one will be able to take this from me, because there's so much truth in here. So on that note, I want you guys to make sure you protect your peace. Don't let anyone take it. You deserve it. Feed your souls today. Take a walk in nature. Do something that you love to do. And I love you guys. I'll see you on the next one. Bye.